Hey guys, tonight we slip into woolen tunics, crunch through frostbitten heather, and squint at distant sails you hope aren't carrying raiders but might just be your future husband. You're not a warrior swinging an axe. You're something, just as strategic, a Viking girl on the edge of marriageable age. You've just hit 12, maybe 13, and while you're still getting used to braiding your hair in a way that doesn't catch fire near the hearth, your family is already deep in negotiations over your future. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your mother brushes straw from your tunic as she mutters about prospects. You know what that means. It starts with whispered talk near the spinning wheel and ends with men showing up with chests of silver and overly confident smiles. In the Viking world, marriages aren't love stories. They're political chess moves. Your clan wants land access, military alliances, or simply a better spot at the next feast. And you're a pawn for now. You don't get to swipe left or right. Instead, your father and uncles gather around the hearth, calculating dowries. Like merchants at a fish market, they speak in coded language. A strong lad, good bone structure. His cousin's cousin serves Harald Fairhair, all while eyeing your reaction from the corners of their eyes. But here's the wild part. Even at this young age, you're not powerless. Viking girls grow up fast. You learn to read the room, influence talks with a well-timed question, a raised brow, or a reminder that you know how to spin the finest flax this side of Trondheim. Your value isn't just womb-based, it's also domestic. Skill, diplomacy, and family reputation. Now, mainstream history tells us that Norse society was patriarchal, and sure, technically, your father controls the marriage contract. But here's the twist: if you really, truly hated the idea of the match, you had some say. Not always, not everywhere, but enough to matter. Historians still argue whether girls could openly reject a suitor, but evidence from sagas hints at surprising autonomy. One skald even recorded a bride to be stabbing her own hand at the altar to mark the contract with her terms. Talk about boundary setting. Marriage itself is a ritual performance, not a white dress, no try a cloak, gifted by the groom, symbolic keys handed over, and sometimes, yes, a solemn exchange of swords. Imagine gripping cold steel in your palm as you vow loyalty to a man who still smells faintly of smoked eel and nervous sweat. You're led into the longhouse, music thumping through the timber walls, guests cheering with hornfuls of mead. There's laughter, veiled tension, a mild brawl by the soup pot, and beneath it all, the quiet knowledge that this isn't just a wedding, it's a transfer of power. You walk in a daughter. You walk out something else entirely. That night, as you lie beside your new husband, staring at the roof beams above, you feel the weight of expectation settle over your chest like a winter blanket. You're expected to manage his household, birth heirs, and most critically carry forward both families' honor. No pressure, right? But your brain's still racing with 1,000 questions. What if he's useless with livestock? What if his mother hates you? What if you end up holding this place together while he's off chasing glory in England? All valid concerns. After all, husband in Old Norse literally means house dweller. But ironically, many spend their best years sailing far away. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some regions, the bride's hair was unbraided on her wedding night as a symbol of transformation, and the women who did it were often her female kin, whispering crude jokes and questionable advice as they worked. It was part farewell, part hazing ritual. Outside, snow crunches under boots as guests stagger home inside. Your new reality begins. But there's one more odd detail before we move on. Viking weddings were legally binding, only if witnessed by free folk. So technically, if no one sober enough stuck around till the end, you could probably claim a do-over. Just saying. You fall asleep with the keys to a new home clinking softly at your waist, though you don't yet know what they truly unlock. Morning light slices through the smoke hole. You stir beneath wool blankets, not quite ready to face your new life as a married woman. But the household is already humming, footsteps on packed earth, the scrape of cauldrons, and someone arguing with the goat. You swing your legs off the bed and feel the unfamiliar tug of iron keys at your waist. These aren't decorative. They're literal power. They mean you're in charge of the food stores, the textile chest, the ale casks. You control the rhythms of daily life: who eats what, who washes linen when, and what gets traded at the next market. You might not wear a crown, but make no mistake, this is your queendom. The longhouse is your stage. You pace it like a commander. Your mother-in-law pretends not to watch your every move, but she definitely is. You add a pinch of thyme to the stew. Good. You chastise a thrall for wasting wool scraps. Better. You move like you were born here, even if you still don't know where they keep the spare firewood. Marriage doesn't melt you into the background. If anything, you're more visible than ever. Guests judge your posture, your speech, your embroidery patterns. And your husband? He mostly stays out of your way except when he needs to know where the good cheese is hidden. Now, here's a mainstream fact. Viking women could own property and manage estates, even during their husband's lifetime. While Roman wives were often legal extensions of their husbands, Norse women could inherit, sue, and even divorce. This isn't feminist utopia, but it's not medieval misery either. Think somewhere between Game of Thrones and a rural Etsy commune. And speaking of divorce, yes, it existed. If your husband struck you, neglected the household, or just couldn't keep up in any sense, you could walk away. You'd gather witnesses, announce your separation at the front door or by the marital bed, and boom, single again. No court paperwork required. Historians still argue whether this freedom applied to all women or just those of higher rank. But saga after saga includes women who kick bad husbands to the curb. Back in your longhouse, you're learning rhythms. You count days by the growth of the herb garden, the ripening barley, the daily gossip cycle. Your favorite cousin visits, whispering that someone thinks you've gotten too confident. You just smile. Power always makes people nervous, especially when it wears a linen apron and knows how to calculate cattle prices. Here's your first real test. Your husband leaves for a trading voyage to Hedeby. He'll be gone for weeks, maybe months. Before he goes, he kisses your cheek, pats the goat you're still not sure which of you he loves more, and says, "You'll manage." And manage you do. In his absence, you track trade debts, negotiate with neighbors, and supervise seasonal slaughter like a seasoned butcher. You send a message to your brother's farm requesting smoked fish. You make sure the thralls don't skim extra from the meat barrel. And when the local blacksmith tries to overcharge you for a plow repair, you stare him down until he suddenly remembers the friends and family rate. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some women carried small amulets shaped like hammers, not just for thirst protection, but maybe as subtle signals of authority. One archaeologist even theorized that female smiths and merchants used them like medieval business cards. You wear one too, tucked beneath your tunic. People don't need to see it, they just know. Winter creeps in. The longhouse glows with firelight and smells of cured meat and damp wool. Your husband returns thinner, richer, and summer in places you didn't know could burn. He brings you amber beads, a badly folded poem, and tales of distant lands. But more importantly, he brings respect. He's heard how well you ran things. Maybe better than he could have, but not everything is perfect. Rumors have started about a neighbor Ingrid whose eyes linger too long on your man. One evening at a feast, she laughs too loudly at one of his jokes. You smile, refill her drink, and later casually suggest she consider marrying that widowed fisherman no one likes. The next week, they're betrothed. You never raise your voice. You don't need to. The funny thing is, you weren't trained in power, but you understand it better than most. You learn by watching, listening, and adjusting. And now, the keyring at your waist doesn't just unlock storage chests. It unlocks respect. One last detail, childbirth. It's the shadow looming over every Viking wife. You've heard the screams through the walls. You've seen the way older women glance at the midwife's hands with a kind of reverence. Giving birth is warrior work here. If you survive it, you earn a title in its own right, mother of the household. Some graves have been found where women were buried with weapons not because they fought with swords, but because they conquered death through childbirth. That's the level of respect. But yeah, you probably still would have preferred some basic hygiene and antibiotics. Your husband jokes that you run the place now, but the joke's old. Everyone already knows it's true. The news comes at dawn. A boy runs barefoot across the frost-hardened ground, hair wild, voice cracking. He's gone. The ship never made it home. You freeze mid-stir, your hands still in the barley sack. It takes a moment for your mind to catch up with your gut. Your husband is dead, lost at sea, or maybe raided. No body, just the sea's cold shrug. You're not a girl anymore. You're not a wife either. You're a widow, and that word doesn't mean what it means now. In Viking society, widowhood isn't just sorrow, it's power. You slide the keys from your belt and weigh them in your hand. Still yours. And now, with no husband to defer to, your authority sharpens. People come to you not out of courtesy, but need. The farm is yours. The debtors, the livestock, the grain stores, all of it. Mainstream history usually skips this part, the part where Viking widows thrive. But sagas and legal text reveal that many of them didn't retreat into mourning. They stepped into roles of control. They became guardians of children, managers of trade, and enforcers of clan loyalties. You, too, are expected to lead. But first, there's the funeral, even without a body. You prepare a feast. Neighbors gather, some out of grief, some to take mental inventory of what you now possess. You sit at the head table, veil lowered, expression unreadable. A skald recites a verse about storms and fate. Someone tries to test your vulnerability by mentioning remarriage. You smile and offer him the worst piece of boiled mutton. After the guests leave, you stand alone in the doorway. Cold air bites your cheeks. You murmur a farewell under your breath, not to your husband, but to who you were when he was alive. Then you step back inside. There's too much to do. You start with the books, well, not books exactly, but your tally sticks and memory rhymes. Who owes grain? Who borrowed oxen? Who hasn't sent the wool they promised in spring? You're the kind of woman now who remembers everything, even things you pretend to forget. Now comes your first real challenge, asserting your right to stay unmarried. Your in-laws sniff opportunity. A cousin comes calling with a slick smile and an offer to relieve you of your burden. Translation: take everything. But the law is on your side. Here's the official fact of the night. Viking law allowed widows to inherit property and run households, especially if children were involved. You just need to prove your late husband never reassigned the land. You produce the witnesses. You recite the terms. You even quote his drunken boasting that my wife's sharper than my sword. Everyone laughs. The cousin leaves with less dignity than he came with, but it's not all drama and defense. You start enjoying the freedom. You sit at night by the hearth, combing your hair slowly, knowing no one expects you to entertain or birth or serve. You trade directly with merchants, haggle like a pro, and develop a taste for honeyed ale, of course. There's always a whisper campaign. Some say you use sire magic to sink your husband's ship. Others say you wear his bones in a pouch around your neck. You encourage none of it, but you don't exactly deny it either. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Viking women carved runes into small bones or bits of driftwood and wore them as charms, protection, memory, maybe revenge. You keep a carved rune hidden in your sewing basket. It means stay away in the most poetic possible way. Your children, if you have any, grow up with a strange combination of fear and pride. You teach your daughters how to weigh silver and your sons how to keep their mouths shut around drunk neighbors. You let no one slack off, not even the priest who keeps accidentally shortchanging you on burial prayers. Years pass. You attend more things legal assemblies than your male cousins do. You even sponsor a dispute settlement between feuding farms. Your name carries weight now. When you walk into the marketplace, people stop talking. You like that, but there's a sadness too. Some nights, you stare at the empty side of your bed and wonder what it would feel like to sleep next to someone again. Someone who didn't need you to be strong every second of every day. But those are dangerous thoughts. You blow out the lamp before they take root. Historians still argue whether widowed Viking women preferred solitude or simply had no time to remarry. But from what you know, the answer's probably both. Why gamble with a second husband when the first one dying gave you this much control? There's one final test to your status. A rival family accuses you of withholding payment for a pig. A pig. You attend the hearing at the Thingstead dressed in dark wool, your hair pinned high, the hearing polished until it glints like a blade. You produce your tally stick, 3 witnesses and a smirk. You win, naturally. On the way home, you stop at a stream, dip your hands in the icy water, and whisper your husband's name just once. Then you flick the water off your fingers like you're dry in the past. You're not just a widow. You're a matriarch, a landowner, a woman people cross the road to avoid or to follow. The Thingstead rises in the center of the settlement like a circle of secrets. Stones mark the spots where elders sit, and the air always smells faintly of sweat, turf smoke, and tension. You approach in your thickest cloak, keyring glinting, like a medal of office, and settle onto the seat you've earned not by bloodline, but by reputation. This is where disputes get settled, land gets claimed, marriage is approved, and feuds occasionally resolved, though usually with just enough residual bitterness to keep things spicy. And you're not just here to watch, you're here to rule. Let's rewind. Years have passed since your husband's death. You've managed farms, brokered trades, raised children, advised warriors, and quieted scandals. So, when local leaders began grumbling about women meddling too much in politics, people remembered how you handled that pig dispute, that boundary theft, that accidental arson incident involving the meat shed. Now, your voice counts. And here's tonight's mainstream historical fact. Viking women could and did participate in lawmaking assemblies, especially widows or high-ranking women. While they weren't technically law speakers or judges, their opinions were often sought, and their backing could sway verdicts, especially if they brought half the food for the feast afterward. You're listening now as two brothers argue over grazing rights. One waves a carved staff. The other keeps spitting for emphasis. The crowd leans in. You say nothing at first, just stir your drink. Then quietly, evenly you ask a single question. Who fed the calves this spring? Silence. Everyone realizes you know the truth. Everyone also realizes you've already decided the outcome. The verdict you announce isn't just law, it's wisdom. People start visiting your farm for advice. A teenage girl unsure whether to marry the loud boy with the sheep tattoo. A fisherman whose cousin accidentally built his smokehouse on the wrong side of the river. Even the blacksmith whose son joined a cult involving mushrooms and screaming at trees. You don't solve every problem, but you listen. You ask the right questions. And you keep a little mental ledger of who's honest, who's lazy, and who tries too hard to act like they're not scared of you. But with visibility comes risk. One evening, a messenger brings word. You've been accused of dark magic. Someone claims you cursed their grain. Their cow miscarried. Their wife grew suspiciously assertive. You arch your brow. Ask who spread the rumor, and when the messenger stammers, you mutter, tell him I said thank you. I was getting bored. Still, the accusation lingers. Viking society walked a complicated line with magic. Sire women's sorcery was both feared and respected. Some women were revered as Velier, seers who wandered from village to village with staffs, animal bones, and spooky lullabies. Others were burned, drowned, or simply disappeared. You've never claimed to be a sorceress, but you've certainly benefited from the idea. People hesitate before crossing you. They eye your carved combs, your raven brooch, that peculiar black cat who started showing up every solstice. Maybe it's better if they keep wondering. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. One recovered Norse grave featured a woman buried with a staff once thought to be a distaff for spinning, but now believed by some scholars to be a magic wand. Others argue it was just a fancy walking stick. Historians still debate whether that staff marked her as a veilable witch priestess or just someone who liked long walks and drama. Either way, no one messed with her. Back to your story. One spring, a child disappears. A boy. Panic ripples through the village. Accusations fly like crows. You're pulled into the chaos, half judge, half therapist. You interview mothers, uncles, even livestock handlers. Eventually, you find the boy hiding in the barn, terrified he'd be punished for breaking a loom. You don't scold him. You hand him bread, pat his shoulder, and tell him not to worry. The next day, everyone calls you a hero. You correct them. I'm just nosy and stubborn. But still, your legend grows. And yet, your lonely. Power isolates. No one flirts with you anymore. Men defer or joke nervously. Women admire, but keep their distance. You overhear a child say, "She's the one who sees everything." You're not sure if they mean it as praise or warning. So you start doing something unexpected. Storytelling. Around fires. At weddings. Even on rainy afternoons when you invite neighbors in for ale and gossip. You tell sagas, some true, some mostly true. Stories about sea monsters, cursed rings, and women who outwitted entire armies using only honey. Rumors and passive-aggressive embroidery. Through these stories, you shape your world more subtly. You hint at which families to marry into. Which customs are fading. Which lessons should never be forgotten. One night, during a feast, a young girl recites your story as if it's legend. You hear her say, she ran a farm, judged the thing, outlived 3 husbands, and carried a sword in her knitting basket. You don't correct her. The sword part's not even true, but it feels true now. At home, you sit beside the fire, brushing your hair slowly, humming an old tune your grandmother used to sing. The one about a raven who fell in love with a bear. No one remembers all the verses anymore, but you do. Outside, the wind picks up. You glance at the door and smile. If someone knocks tonight, they'd better have good manners and a better story. Your hands are slower now. You notice it when you tie bundles of herbs, when you braid your hair, when you carve one last rune into the side of your loom, more for memory than magic. The farm still runs. The smoke still rises. The grain still grows. But your days begin with stiffness and end with long stretches of thought. You've aged, yes, but you've also ripened, like hard cheese or a saga improved in retelling. You're no longer the woman people fear. You're the one they seek out quietly behind the barn. By the cooking pit, near the well, they ask about dreams, land deals, how to tell if a marriage will work, whether the gods still listen. You give answers in riddles now, not because you're being mysterious, okay? Sometimes you are, but because you've learned that the best truths aren't handed over like bread. They're found, chewed, and swallowed slowly. You wake early, out of habit, and light a small lamp. Before the house stirs, your daughter-in-law tends to the kitchen now, and your grandchild stomps around shouting things like, "I'm Odin," while wearing a colander on his head. You pretend to disapprove, but secretly you're thrilled. The saga lives on. In strange helmets. Marriage in this stage of life is no longer a contract. It's an archive. People come to you with their unions cracking and their hearts confused. And you guide them not by telling them what love is but by explaining what it isn't. It isn't conquest. It isn't ownership. It isn't silence. Here's tonight's final mainstream historical fact. Norse women often acted as matchmakers, midwives, and keepers of lineage. Elders, especially women, were the oral historians of their kin. Without you, the names fade, the rivalries dissolve, the lessons are lost. You keep the family sagas alive. You know which uncle once tried to marry his cousin. You remember which wedding got rained out by a freak hailstorm and which baby was born during a wolf moon. You pass these stories down, not in scrolls or ink, but by murmuring them over spinning wheels and harvest prep. Historians still argue whether the most powerful Viking women held formal titles or just informal influence. You know the answer. It's not about rank, it's about who people trust at 2 a.m. when a child is sick and the sky feels heavy. And here's your final quirky tidbit. Some Viking women were buried not in graves, but in boats, ships meant to carry them into the next world. One grave even included a sacrificed horse, kitchen tools, and allegedly a game board. Because clearly, you'll need to win arguments even in the afterlife. Tonight, you sit by the hearth with your hands wrapped around a warm cup of birch bark tea. You've got a fur draped over your knees and a small scrap of cloth you're pretending to mend. In truth, you're just listening. Outside, the wind hums through the gaps in the longhouse walls. Someone is telling your story again poorly. But you smile, they're getting the important parts right. Your hair is white now, and your body aches more than it doesn't. But your eyes still catch everything. You see who's falling in love, who's lying, who's going to be troubled by next harvest. You won't live forever. You know that. But your saga already does. It lives in the laws you shaped, the people you guided, the things you taught by simply existing the way you did. Loud, quiet, bold, tender, strategic, stubborn, kind. They'll remember your marriage. Yes, but more than that. They'll remember how you navigated it. Not like a ship caught in a storm. Like a woman steering by stars of her own choosing. And now, your story gently fades into dusk. The fire burns low, casting soft orange light over the stone floor, dancing across the bowls and baskets and quiet, sleeping tools. You stretch your hands toward the warmth, fingers stiff but still steady. The longhouse is hushed, save for the rhythmic creak of beams settling and the slow breathing of those under your roof. Outside, the sky turns the color of old parchment, and the wind stirs the heather with secrets too ancient to translate. You hear a distant owl, a soft hoot almost like a lullaby, one you used to sing when your own children stirred in the night, and you press your palm against their backs until they sank again into sleep. The saga doesn't end here, of course. It never does, because it was never just yours. It belongs. Now to the women who walk after you, keys at their belts, stories on their tongues, cleverness behind their eyes. You've passed the thread, and someone else is weaving now. So let yourself rest. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. Let the flickering firelight lull you into peace. You've built, you've battled, you've brokered more than most kings ever could. You've laughed, you've mourned, you've outlived storms and songs alike. And now, you sleep.